What's it like running a transport authority when there isn't enough money around? What's it like running the biggest integrated transport authority on earth when there isn't enough money around, and there hasn't been for a decade? That's a big part of the conversation I have in this Interchat from the Interchange conference in Manchester with the Transport for London Commissioner, Andy Lord. Let's have a listen. Welcome back to Manchester Central. Welcome back to the Interchange conference. It's time for another Interchat. And I am joined by my former boss's boss, the Commissioner of Transport for London, Andy Lord.
Hi, Thomas. Good to be here.
Good to see you again. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I see my listeners can't see this, but you're very proudly wearing a TfL lapel badge, as you always are.
Absolutely. I mean, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary, so very proud of the fact we are officially the largest publicly integrated transport authority in the world. So wear it with pride, but equally fantastic to be an event like this and hear what other organisations are doing as well.
Once upon a time, there wouldn't really have been any rival pin badges at an event like this, but now there's plenty of people going around with their B Network badges. It's an interesting time. You've kind of been the Commissioner of TfL during this transition from TfL being the integrated transport authority that everyone looks to in the UK to being one of a whole series of integrated transport authorities. What's that felt like? Or what's it like being witnessing that transition from the outside?
Well, it's been great. I mean, still incredibly proud of what we've achieved at TfL, but also the role we've played in other cities, learning from what TfL has done well and what TfL could have done slightly better. In Manchester, probably the greatest example. And we helped a lot with their bus model. Proud of that. I think Vernon and the team here have done a fantastic job. Obviously, other combined authorities now looking to do the same. We're still the largest, biggest, most complex. And, for me, it's around how can we work together more for the benefit of the country. You look at what TfL delivers in terms of its impact to the economy, the benefit to jobs in the wider supply chain. It's really significant. And equally, the role that we can play in terms of further investment in TfL enables further delivery investment for those other authorities in the UK, whether it's around future rolling stock capability or roads or buses. So I think it's fantastic that other parts of the country. I'm a proud northerner. I grew up in the Peak District where you had one bus an hour to Sheffield and one bus every 2 hours to Manchester. And transport in the north and elsewhere really needs to develop and grow. And if people can learn from the London model, then that's something I'm really proud of and we're happy to share.
I didn't know you grew up in the Peak District. I'm spending a lot of my time on Mini Switzerland, a project to try and improve connectivity in the Peak District to Sheffield and Manchester.
There you go.
I might pick your brains on that afterwards. One of the things that strikes me at the moment is we've got this resurgence in transport in cities across the UK, which is absolutely fantastic. As you say, the entire underpinning of London's status as Britain's only mega city and the anchor of the entire UK economy still is driven by the depth of its public transport connectivity and this extraordinary scale of integrated transport that you now lead. Yet it sometimes feels like, with all of the focus on creating these networks elsewhere, which are essential to diversifying the UK economy and growing our regional economies and addressing the productivity gap that we now have, maintaining, expanding and building on what we already have sometimes gets forgotten. Do you get this sense?
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, we need transport across the UK to be integrated, so that people can have a seamless journey, whether it's by road or rail or any other means. But equally, transport and infrastructure is absolutely critical to growth, economic growth, jobs, skills and development. And if you look at London in particular, and you look at some of our national highways as well, and Network Rail's infrastructure, it's all very well building new stuff. It's important that we build new infrastructure to enable that growth. But we have to look after, maintain and renew the existing infrastructure. If you look at the challenge that we have in TfL, we have the oldest metro railway in the world. Some of our infrastructure is well over 100 years old. It needs renewing, it needs replacing. River crossings in London, many of them well over 100 years old, have operating restrictions on. The TfL road network, we're responsible for the strategic road network in London. We have significant number of bridges and tunnels that have operating restrictions on them because we haven't had the funding over the years to go in and renew and replace key assets. And that has to be an ongoing program of work for any infrastructure manager, be they road or rail or anything else. And it is vital that all of us focus on that just as much as we focus on building the new stuff. And when we do build new infrastructure, we need to make sure we have a proper maintenance program and renewal program for the life of those assets, because you can't just cut a ribbon and operate a new train and then expect it to carry on delivering like that for decades and decades without intervention. So it is absolutely vital that we work with government. We work with NISTA. Becky Wood is doing a fantastic job there to really bring to a fore the fact that we've got aging infrastructure in this country that needs renewing and needs investment.
And, I think TfL needs to spend about £1 billion every year on asset renewals. And I think that it's about a decade since TfL was actually last able to do that, which isn't just your tenure, it's all of your predecessors' tenure since TfL was last renewing on a like-for-like basis everything it owns.
And that's absolutely right. And we spend about £2 billion a year across our entire capital programme. As you say, we need to be spending about 1.1 billion a year to renew existing assets. We are very grateful for the long-term capital funding agreement we got from government as part of the CSR last June. That is our longest and highest value capital settlement that TfL's had for more than a decade. But the consequences of the fact previous governments have not given us that means we have a significant renewals backlog, and we need to continue to grow that. So really proud of the fact that we took a new 5-year business plan to our board that was approved 3 weeks ago. That will see our asset renewals increase year on year for the rest of this decade. Still doesn't get us to the 1.1, but it gets us closer to it. We will continue to make the case from government for a proportionment of funds from the infrastructure fund for road and river crossings in London, because we need to continue to grow that renewals program. But yeah, we are making small steps, but got to have real focus on those renewals.
So, regular listeners know that it's compulsory for me to mention Switzerland during the course of every podcast episode. So we've come to that moment and we're going to do it right now. In Switzerland, there is an infrastructure fund, and that infrastructure fund is renewed every year through a suite of dedicated hypothecated taxes, all very small ones. So, a 0.25% of this tax, 0.5% of that tax, so small you barely notice. But it recognizes that transport infrastructure is of a different type of long-term asset. And that fund renews, and within that fund, there is a stream that goes to asset renewals and a stream that goes to enhancements. And transport authorities have a legal obligation to renew what they have before they build new stuff, which gets around the problem that politicians always want a ribbon to cut. When I was talking to Helmut Eichhorn on this podcast, who runs Swisspass, the Integrated Transport Authority in Switzerland, he said that the secret in Switzerland is that politicians recognize that public transport is, in his words, the way to become a very wealthy country. And it feels like two things are true. One, despite the fact that London has proved this case beyond measure, it's still not fully internalized that that is true. And secondly, it feels like we are a very, very long way from developing something like that infrastructure fund that just organically flows through and makes sure the funds are there when they are needed. Do you get that sense that at a national level, politicians still don't quite get this link between transport and economic growth? And do you think there's any possibility of us getting to something like a Swiss-style infrastructure fund that means we don't have to have these arguments on a daily basis?
So I think the majority of politicians do get the need. I think the mayor absolutely does. You can see that. We have a mayor's transport strategy that was developed in 2016 and delivers through to 2041. We're very fortunate, I think, in having a Secretary of State and a rail minister who's also Minister for London, who fully understand that because of their backgrounds.
Both of them used to work at TfL.
Indeed. But I think they really get the wider impact of that. That's why they are so focused on what else they can do across wider devolved cities, the rail, whatever else it may be. I think in terms of the latter question, that's something very much to the politicians. You have to recognise that the country is having some real fiscal challenges post-pandemic. The global situation, I mean, we're all very alive to what's been going on in the Middle East. We have to be realistic. And of course, priority has to sometimes go elsewhere, health service, education, defence, whatever it may be. So transport is a big element of government funding. There would be many people who'd say we should have a similar tax for other critical public services. So, I think it is incumbent on us as transport authorities to make the case, but also to find alternative funding solutions. And again, TfL has a lot of experience of doing that. And we're very open to that and looking for ways to do that, particularly for funding new infrastructure. So I think there is a thing that we need to look at in terms of how can we fund renewals, and perhaps there's a different model for enhancements and new infrastructure that could be funded through different means.
And do you think we're going to become better at doing some of those different funding models for new infrastructure? If you look at, for example, the DLR extension to Lewisham about 30 years ago now, that was one of the few really successful PFIs that I think delivered everything that it was set out to do. We all hear about the amount of pension fund investment that's sitting there waiting to be deployed, yet somehow as a country, we've never been able to find a way of channeling that into long-term infrastructure assets, of which public transport feels like it should be part. Are we getting closer to being able to do that, do you think?
Well, I think we've got more examples now where it's worked effectively. You've touched on one there. We had the Northern Line extension. We've had the Barking Riverside extension on the overground. Parts of the Elizabeth line were funded in that way. And we have clearly very grateful for the fact we got government backing for the DLR extension to Thamesmead. We are looking at a variety of funding options for that. So, I think we've got a model in London that can be actually quite flexible. We need to make sure that we stay within our borrowing means, obviously. But I think we have to think differently, and we have to think about how that can be applied elsewhere across the country as well, because the reality is we can't just expect the government to fund everything. It can't afford to, and the government has to prioritise. And whilst as Commissioner of Transport, I might want transport to be number one, all of us will have a view on what else needs to be funded. So it's incumbent on me and my colleagues elsewhere in transport authorities to think about how can we do it differently.
Obviously, one of the main ways in which transport can be funded is through fares. And, it's very explicit in the governance model for London that fares are a mayoral decision, not a transport authority decision. But part of the consequence of that has been that fares have been held down in London at different times and in different ways for multiple years. Is there any way of being able to restore fares as a means of funding transport investment? Because you're seeing, if anything, the opposite, that other mayoral authorities, as mayors gain fare-raising powers, are choosing to use their fare-raising powers to hold down fares. But they're not being balanced by increased taxes elsewhere, and so it's the system that gets squeezed.
Well, we need to have a transport system that is affordable. We have the largest bus network in Western Europe. We have the most affordable bus fares in the country, and our buses are our busiest, highest passenger carrying mode in London. Over 5 million people use the bus every day in London. A big element of that is having affordable fares. And if you look at the wider fare box, about 60% of our revenue comes from fares income. So that is helping fund our investment. As you know, we've been very successful in TfL in becoming financially sustainable. We've covered our cost of operations now 2 years in a row. We're on track for a third. No other public transport authority in the world has managed that except for Hong Kong. And that's because they're a very large commercial property organisation that happens to run a subway in the basement of their skyscrapers. So we should be really proud of that. And it's all too easy to say the answer is put the fares up, but we have to recognise that we have got to be efficient. We've got to find more effective ways of taking costs out of the organisation. We've delivered 1.8 billion of recurring savings over the last few years. That's huge. And that all enables us to reinvest back into the network. So it's not just about fares, it's about being smart around non-fares revenue as well. We're growing our commercial revenue, our property arm, Places for London, is being very successful. And of course, our advertising and other commercial revenue is an important part to play in that too.
When we worked together, it was very much the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic. And at different times, TfL was being funded literally on a 6-week basis. And you now have a 5-year business plan. What's it been like for you as the leader of this extraordinary scale of organisation that, when you took over as commissioner, it was literally hand to mouth, and now being able to step out from that and have this long-term horizon for the first time?
Well, I feel very honoured and privileged to have this role. I think it's the best job in transport. I'm very lucky that my predecessors did such a fantastic job on the objectives that they were set. But it's fantastic that we've been able to take a step forward, give the organisation certainty and stability for the next few years that we just haven't had since the pandemic. I joined TfL 4 months before the pandemic started as managing director of the Tube, and literally been in crisis mode for the first 3 years of that. So to get us onto a stable platform, give us the funding certainty that we need, continue to make the case for investment where it makes sense. We've got some really exciting programs over the next few years, the Piccadilly line upgrade, new fleet on the DLR, new trams coming, finally getting to place the order for new rolling stock on the Bakerloo line.
My mum will miss the old train. She loves the old
Well,
train.
I'm sure she'll still be able to ride on for quite a while. But nonetheless, the future is actually really bright. I'm really optimistic. And of course, London will continue to play a leading role in the growth of the economy. And one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact we've been able to demonstrate to the rest of the country, government, economists, businesses, around the economic value that TfL brings to the wider UK. And I think we have got TfL into a different place now in terms of the value it delivers, not just to London, but to the wider UK economy, jobs, skills, and of course, enabling those other authorities to learn from both the things we've done well and the things that we could have done slightly better.
Andy Lord, Commissioner of Transport for London, my former boss, thank you very much indeed for this Interchat from Interchange.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you so much to Andy Lord, and thank you so much to you for listening. This was an Interchat from the Interchange conference in Manchester. You can be here yourself next year if you sign up with Interchange to attend. I'll be back on Wednesday with another of my conventional freewheeling podcast episodes, and I'll be drip feeding these Interchats into this stream over the course of the next few months. If you are on Apple or on Spotify and you feel like just pressing that little 5-star button, it's the row of stars, the one to the furthest right, the 5-star button, and giving us a comment, that would be absolutely fantastic. Either way, I will see you again in a few days' time. Goodbye.